Realm presents Ninth Step Murders, Season 2, Episode 8.
The Azabujuban neighborhood thrummed with Matsuri festivities. Color, sound, light, scent, and flavor colliding in appreciation of the cooler evening temperatures. A projection of a playful animated rabbit bounced across a large banner, cheerfully reminding everyone to keep to the left in the flow of foot traffic, while vendors called out, enticing the crowd with free samples and delectable aromas. An ever-changing crowd milled around the center performance stage. A popular local band draped in gold and petals was just exiting as a dance troupe took their place. Several children shouted in delight at the colorful, grimacing oni masks that transformed each dancer into a demon. Electronic signs flashed reminders. Activate augmented reality. Be it through rented lenses, headsets of their own, or body mods, nearly the entire crowd synced up with digital displays that further transformed the dancers, giving them the claws, tails, and glittering light that trailed after each movement, emphasizing their otherworldly nature. Several loud, bass-heavy beats marked the beginning of the song. A traditional piece, updated, synthesized with modern sounds to appeal to a contemporary audience. Each Oni dancer moved their hands and feet in time with the music, their choreography evoking a sense of playful menace, flirting with myth and nightmare in the safety of Matsuri revelry. The mask's expressions shifted through augmented reality as the dance progressed, each tilt of the head on each dancer changing the attitude of their demonic faces. The light, shadow, and color of augmented reality displays turned their performance into a living sumi-e painting, watercolor strokes gliding through and around the space. As the music shifted, the dancers fell to the floor of the stage in unison, their movements mimicking death throes. The one remaining dancer who stood over the others dramatically waved a flaming sword above the bodies of the fallen, the fire painted bright crimson by augmented reality. When the dancers rose again, it took several moments for anyone to realize that one of them remained writhing on the floor, and several more beats for people to wonder whether this was part of the performance. A couple of the dancers fell out of sync with the others as they noticed their fallen companion, when blood seeped out from beneath the supine dancer's mask and pooled onto the stage. Multiple people screamed. A few minutes ago, Miyako and Kaori enjoyed the relatively cooler evening air, while munching on shrimp teppanyaki and perusing the Matsuri vendor stalls. Festival-goers dined on traditional Japanese delicacies, along with trendy, deconstructed street fare, and a multitude of strange edible concoctions. Music echoed throughout the area from the main performance stage one street over. Miyako caught Kaori bopping along to the beat. When Kaori noticed herself being watched, she exaggerated her movements to make Miyako laugh. It worked. Bless her. Miyako tried to avoid thinking about the thing that sat between them like a cyst, threatening to burst. The ship, the explosion, their role in all of it. A knot of cold dread congealed in her stomach when she lingered for too long on their meeting on the water. Her own shock at seeing her girlfriend reflected in Kaori's face. The separate secrets they never asked about but now shared, for better or worse. These thoughts regularly infected her attention no matter how much she tried not to look directly at them. Some part of her hoped if she ignored that part of their history, she could starve it to death. Make it harmless. It didn't have to change anything between them, right? Their personal connection wasn't a factor in their mutual involvement in the resistance, so the reverse could be true too. They could make it true. Plenty of people compartmentalized things for the good of their relationships. She already compartmentalized what she saw on the job. This didn't have to be any different. They could both tuck it neatly away. Quarantined. Kaori tugged Miyako's hand to guide her toward a Shiba Inu rescue group that had brought several dogs dressed up in jinbei. She wondered if Kaori was actually this good at remaining in the present moment, or if she was just pretending not to ruminate as much as Miyako. Either way, the dogs were cute, a welcome distraction. She tossed her empty food container into the recycling bin on the way to the rescue booth, checked to make sure her hands were free of sauce, and committed to the moment. She only managed a quick pat on the rump of a particularly chubby Shiba Inu when they heard the screams. Instinct drove Miyako to her feet. All the music had stopped. More shouts rose up from the direction of the main stage. "Stay here," she told Kaori, then headed in the direction of the commotion. She cut through an alley to make her way to the next street over. An announcer's voice said something over the loudspeaker, but Miyako couldn't make it out in the midst of the noise and chaos. People pushed to get closer to whatever was happening, forming an undulating mass of rubbernecking. Miyako pulled out her credentials to force a path through, but even then it was slow going. By the time she made it to the stage, uniformed officers had forced the crowd back, but people remained in the general vicinity, eager to see and record whatever they could.
Inspector Koreda,
one of the officers said, surprised. She took in Miyako, eyes darting over her yukata. It bothered Miyako how much this bothered her, being seen this way.
We just put in the call.
What happened here? Miyako struggled with her yukata but managed to crouch down next to what appeared to be a dead performer wearing an oni mask. Blood pooled around his head and stained his white costume.
I didn't mean to,
came a voice from behind one of the officers. One of the other dancers stumbled his way toward Miyako. The officers held him back. Let him through, Miyako said, standing. I'm Detective Koreda. You didn't mean to what? The dancer's eyes were wide and fixated on the dead man. He rotated his own mask in his bloody hands, smearing red along the outside. Around and around. Frantic.
His face. There was so much blood around his face. I didn't mean to hurt his face.
Take a deep breath, Miyako said. He looked at her as if fully registering her for the first time, then complied, though on the exhale he started sobbing. What happened here? Miyako asked again, keeping her voice soft and even. The man wiped his nose.
He fell during the dance. I tried to help him, but there was so much blood around his face. I don't...
His breathing was erratic, on the verge of a meltdown. Listen, Miyako said. It's okay.
It's not. He's dead and I couldn't help him. I didn't mean to let him die. I was going to help him. I could hear him choking inside his mask.
Miyako held the dancer by the upper arms. This seemed to ground him enough to slow his panic a little. It's okay to be afraid. Why don't we have you sit down right over there with Officer Kajiyama? We'll get you some water. Once the man was reasonably settled, Miyako directed another officer to continue taking statements from dancers and witnesses, while she helped erect a crime scene perimeter. As she did this, she noticed Kaori on the edge of the crowd, so she headed over to her. I'm sorry, Miyako said. It's okay. I get it. Kaori's expression was sincere. She really did get it. She always did. You do what you need to do. Emma arrived at the scene along with Sato and his team of crime scene technicians, who immediately went to work. The lingering smell of matsuri fare from nearby vendors made her want to meander away to pick up something to eat, crime scene or no crime scene. She could practically taste the sizzling meat and vegetables on the air. She'd been so preoccupied with getting justice against Charles, and then having to protect him, and so consumed with resentment for all he'd done, that she'd been forgetting to enjoy Tokyo. Should she be? How much leisure time could she really allow herself with Charles's constant evasion of justice on her shoulders? By the time she'd made it to the stage, her thoughts about Charles had completely eclipsed any idea of festival food, souring her appetite.
Your yukata is so cute,
she said to Miyako.
I saw Kaori leaving on the way in. Date?
Miyako absently looked down at her pink and yellow yukata.
Yeah. She only left because...
Miyako gestured to the scene.
Seems pretty clear it was a murder, but we'll see what Sato says.
Emma shook her head.
Who does that? Who kills at a matsuri? All these kids.
We'll find out.
She tilted her head toward the officers.
They're taking statements. I sent our preliminary information to the data miners and requested drone footage. It's going to be tough to get reliable reports on this one.
Miyako continued filling Emma in and passed her a pair of gloves. The victim was confirmed to be 32-year-old Murata Haruki. So far, all of the statements had been roughly the same. The victim fell during the performance and bled out on the stage. Most audience members struggled to recall details due to the obfuscating nature of augmented reality. With demon tails whipping about and digital sumie enhancing the performance, it was hard for most people to know what they were looking at, much less provide the kind of illuminating detail that would be most helpful. Emma knelt down next to the body and folded the sheet back to expose the victim's face. Miyako edged closer to see that the Oni mask was still on. This was a substantial costume piece. The edges of the mask did not stop at his face, but rather wrapped back toward his ears and around his jaw, extending lower onto the neck. From what she saw during her preliminary review of the case so far, not all of the dancers wore masks in this style. Maybe half of them. Miyako crouched as well now, and ran her gloved finger along the lower edge of the mask on the left side of the victim's neck, which was a mess of congealed blood. When she got to the bottom, there was a seam beneath the mask's chin.
This must be where it opens,
she said as Emma peered closer. She gently pulled the two halves of the mask apart near the seam, careful not to damage it. After trying a few times and a few different grips, she managed to unhook the mask and began to open it. Or she tried to. When she pulled the sides of the mask away from the victim's head, the halves should have fanned open from the outside, allowing the wearer to then pull it away from their face. When Miyako did this, chunks of his neck and face came with it. The sound of his flesh ripping apart seemed much louder than it should have and would haunt Miyako's dreams. Emma said something, but she was too focused on the victim to catch what it was. As Miyako stood, Sato had just hurried over.
Sorry, I should have... We're going to need you to take a close look at the mask,
Miyako said, then told him what she'd seen. He looked at the victim as she spoke, head still uncovered. The mask was partially open on the sides, but from their standing vantage point, all they could see was drying blood and shadows.
It's possible something in the mask punctured his carotid artery,
Sato said.
I suspect there's a bit more to it. We'll let you know when we find.
Please do, Miyako said.
In the meantime, we'll move these interrogations to 9th step.
It took a few hours to coordinate with the uniformed officers and the witnesses to get everyone situated at the station. By then, the data miners had returned their preliminary findings. What they were able to see from the security footage told them very little, no more than what bystanders and fellow dancers had reported. Sato and his team had also uncovered the mechanisms inside the victim's mask. Using a remote trigger, someone had used the mask to deploy a series of blades around the outside of the mask, puncturing the victim's throat and face. They had also found an empty syringe. Sato suspected the blades were used to hold the mask in place, while the syringe delivered a lethal dose of poison. discovering precisely what poison would take more time. Miyako imagined what it would have been like for someone to die so gruesomely, and had some suspicions of her own. Those blades weren't just a method to secure the mask in a way that no one would be able to remove while the poison did its work, though they clearly served that purpose well. They were also a vehicle for terror. Whoever did this wanted the victim to die in fear and agony. The first few dancer interviews confirmed what the officers at the crime scene had gathered initially. The Oni dance was organized by the company Matsumoto Group, one of the major sponsors for the Matsuri in their neighborhood. The managers of several different departments had worked together to devise the dance project as a team-building exercise. The victim, Murata Haruki, had been with Matsumoto Group for 6 years. Thanks to a combination of drone footage from a private security company hired for the event and eyewitness testimony, they were able to rule out most of the dancers as suspects. Several were in full view of one or more of the drones with exonerating footage of their empty hands. One of them handled a sword prop with both hands at the time of the victim's death and couldn't have remote-activated the mask. Upon inspecting the sword, they discovered it contained no hidden signaling device. Nothing but carved and painted foam. Emma and Miyako examined the security footage in an empty interrogation room, fueled by piles of peanut butter cups, kappa ebisen, and cans of iced coffee.
Stop there and rewind,
Emma said around a mouthful of crunchy shrimp chips. The footage was crystal clear, but it took diligence and patience to review because of the thick Matsuri crowd and the simultaneous recordings from 3 different drones. Data miners were also analyzing the footage, but both Emma and Miyako felt strongly about getting their own impressions of what had happened. Miyako backed up the videos to before the dancers fell to the floor as part of their choreography. Emma pointed.
Okay, play again.
The 3 videos resumed, slowed down to allow frame-by-frame scrutiny. Emma used her ocular implant to detect any additional anomalies that her conscious mind might not otherwise register. But so far, neither her implant nor her own analysis had returned much of use. The events were infuriatingly straightforward and opaque at the same time. The dancers moved as intended. One remained sprawled on the floor, and the crowds milled around as crowds do. A mixture of enthusiastic bopping along with the music and people weaving around each other to get from point A to point B. On stage, all of the dancers lay down except for the one with the sword, who tightly gripped the prop and spun it in wide arcs above the fallen demons. The choreography came to a standstill, then resumed. All the dancers except the murder victim continued with their movements. Eventually, dancers and audience members alike started to understand what had happened. It swept through the crowd in several independent waves of realization. Miyako tapped out a couple of commands, then touched a sequence of witnesses in the crowd around the stage, populating bright red circles around the figures in question. 3 in total.
What are you thinking?
Emma said. See how they don't move? She scrubbed back and forth a few times to illustrate. It may be nothing, but look at how they're not engaged with the performance the way everyone else is. They're not just passing by, either. They're watching intently, but they don't seem to be entertained. See? She pointed out her observations in all 3 drone views. Even when people realize what's happening, even after the screams, these people remain calm. Emma watched and listened. It was true. The 3 individuals seemed eerily unmoved by the murder, but were paying close attention to the stage. Eerie wasn't enough to imply guilt, but it was something to follow up on. Maybe they're just bored or waiting for family members, and that's why they're not engaged with the performance. But once everyone notices someone is hurt on stage, they still barely move. None of them seem particularly disturbed by someone bleeding on the ground. And all 3 of them have their hands in their pockets or otherwise obscured the entire time. Plenty of opportunity to activate the mask. Miyako chewed on the inside of her lip and squinted at the videos.
We have names?
Emma said.
Data miners are swamped, but I'm running a recognition search as we speak. We should get...
A list of 3 names populated on the left side of the screen. Sawaki Fumiko, Nagao Shizu, and Takaoka Koku.
And there we go.
Miyako swiped the list onto her sleeve, then bumped it to Emma's. Emma accessed the live case file to compare the names with what they already knew.
Takaoka is one of the witnesses our officers interviewed and has been ruled out. Sawaki and Nagao are being interviewed as we speak. You ready to talk to the department manager in the meantime? I'll be there in 5.
Miyako remained hunched over, scrubbing back and forth on the footage.
I feel like there's something I'm not putting together from what we're seeing here. I can feel it just outside the reach of my mind.
She leaned back in her chair and stared at the repeating images.
Okay,
Emma said. Miyako still seemed to be holding on to a lot of stress, and it was creeping into her posture.
I'll make us some tea. See you in 5.
One of the department managers, Shigemori Gufu, sat with Miyako and Emma in the overly warm interrogation room. He tugged on the fabric of his dark blue jinbei in a vain attempt to cool himself off. Employee photos of every Oni dancer, including the victim, were projected onto the table between them.
We'd had a rough couple of years,
Shigemori said.
We thought if we came up with a fun, long-term team-building project for our people, we could forge a sense of community that went beyond a shared sense of responsibility. Community through work is one thing, but we wanted them to start seeing each other as a kind of family. That's how we see each other.
Family?
Miyako said.
Yes.
Shigemori looked uncertain when he said this.
Even if it's not always easy.
So you put together this dance troupe to perform at Matsuri?
Miyako said.
Yes. We organized it. Hired 2 professionals to choreograph the dance and teach our group.
You said you'd had a rough couple of years,
Emma said.
Tell us about that.
He hesitated.
It was a difficult time for us.
Miyako resisted the urge to point out his redundancy, simply remaining silent. Emma followed suit. She didn't get the sense that antagonizing him would be useful. Some people required extra encouragement to speak. Others responded better to a quiet space to share.
There was an incident several years ago.
Shigemori fell quiet again, studied the table, watched his hands resting on his legs. He seemed to be deciding how much to say. Not unexpected.
What kind of incident?
Emma said. He shifted in his seat and sighed.
Embezzlement.
Again they remained silent. Shigemori cleared his throat and wiped the sweat from his brow.
Forgive me. This is difficult to speak about. Shameful.
Take your time,
Miyako said.
Whenever you're ready.
There isn't much to tell. One of our employees embezzled from the company over the span of several years. He was sent to prison for it. But our culture hasn't been the same since. Trust has been lost. We haven't been able to heal. Not fully. And it became so much worse last quarter.
What happened last quarter?
Miyako said. He looked at her.
The criminal who stole from us was killed in prison.
Forgive me for sounding callous, but why would the death of this criminal make things worse for the company?
She could think of any number of reasons why that might be the case, but she wanted to hear his interpretation of the situation.
He was one of us once. A friend. And his sister still works with us, so it's a delicate situation.
Can you point out his sister for us?
Emma said. He leaned forward to look at the photos. then pointed to one of the women.
Nagao Mire. She's been a model employee. Her brother's betrayal devastated her, but she doubled down on her work rather than let it distract her.
She was one of the dancers they had ruled out, the one who had wielded the sword prop during the performance, in full view of multiple drones and witnesses.
How did he die?
Miyako said.
The former employee in prison.
An altercation with another inmate. I think he was stabbed.
He shrugged.
That's all I know about it, though. You think it has something to do with Murata?
It's too early to say,
Miyako said, truthfully.
It may be unrelated, but we want to make sure we have all the information we might need.
Emma leaned forward.
We have to ask you again. Is there anyone you can think of who would have wanted to hurt Murata?
No one. He was well liked by many. It makes no sense.
What about someone he may have had a disagreement with at work? Was he ever up for a promotion against someone else? Did anyone feel overshadowed by him? Has he ever had to let anyone go from the company?
Emma said.
No, nothing like that. He's never fired anyone, and he's never been in competition with anyone else.
That you know of,
Miyako said.
Someone could have felt competitive with him without Murata even knowing.
Our culture doesn't promote that kind of attitude. We believe in and encourage cooperation.
You still don't know what people thought of him privately,
Miyako said.
No one wanted him dead.
Well, someone did,
Emma said. A notification beeped on both Miyako and Emma's sleeves. Urgent Temail. Someone had just turned themselves in for the murder of Murata Haruki. The basement of an unpopular bar filled with about a dozen people, grouped in two halves. Soundproof walls quieted the upstairs sounds of the staff cleaning and receiving shipments of alcohol. The door opened, letting in the noise of the delivery vehicles and employees, as a tall man with a clean suit and silver neck tattoos entered. Nakajima-kai shut the door, and everyone felt quiet. Yosuke, like other members of his resistance cell, had been grateful to Nakajima for being willing to work with them. But he'd been nervous about this meeting since they finalized it a few days ago. There were no guarantees. The Nakajima-kai could always decide not to give them the EMP, and without that, their next goals would be significantly harder to accomplish, if not impossible. Which was why Yosuke's cell had come with some ideas of their own. He looked over at the white man with the fabric surveillance-blocking mask, its rippling shadows traveling over the contours of his face like spilled ink. This was their expert they had been saying they could bring to the table, one of the promises with which they'd enticed the Nakajima-kai to meet in the first place. Yosuke despised men like this one, but they would use anyone and anything required to liberate Tokyo. Nakajima-kai put his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed. He made sure everyone was paying attention, then spoke.
We're all busy running this city from different angles, so let's make this as efficient and clean as possible. We have your EMP.
Resistance Cell Leader Shioya Miwako stood. What she lacked in physical size, she made up for in presence, looking at every space as if she owned it and could devour everything in it if she chose, as if it were her right. The tight braid she'd started wearing recently only added to the effect of being coiled and ready to strike. She'd risen in the Resistance's ranks quickly, and Yosuke was glad to have her with them any time his cell met with the Nakajima-kai.
Great.
Shioya gestured to the man with the surveillance mask.
And we have what we promised as well. Our insider.
The man remained seated, placed his hand on his chest, and offered a small bow. Nakajima casually walked over to the man and looked down at him.
Curious that someone would elect to obfuscate his features at a meeting like this. where everyone else offers the mutual vulnerability of identity. That says some interesting things about you.
The man started to bow again, the shapes on his mask ever shifting.
Interesting is not good in this case.
Nakajima turned back to Shioya.
Pageantry. Really?
It was a condition of his participation.
And mutual vulnerability is a condition of ours. Or have you forgotten? I don't recall allowing dispensation to conceal anyone's face.
Shioya scoffed.
Allowing? You aren't in control here. We're equals in this.
Nakajima glanced down and smiled to himself, as if what she said was amusing.
You don't inspire confidence by bringing us a clown in a mask.
The unidentified man stood and yanked the mask off of his face, his hair wild.
The only clownish thing here is your arrogance.
Charles Yardley ran his hands through his hair in an attempt to tame it.
Some of us have important positions to protect. I'm of no use if they find out I'm collaborating with you. Both of you.
He raised his hands in surrender, looking unconvinced.
But we'll do it your way.
Shioya pointed at Yardley, eyes fierce.
Sit down and show some respect.
He stared back at her for a few moments, but eventually complied, shaking his head to himself.
Yardley.
Nakajima's voice was even, but Yosuke could sense the disgust lurking underneath.
No. No, we will not work with this man. Do you understand who he is?
Of course we understand who he is. That's why we need him,
Shioya said.
He can ensure this proceeds smoothly.
A hint of amusement played at the edge of Yardley's mouth. His expression remained otherwise placid, as if his innate vantage point rested above anyone he might deign to interact with, regardless of how they saw him. Insufferable though he may have been, this gaijin did have a bird's-eye view of Tokyo, and access unlike any of them. Which, Yosuke knew, was exactly why they needed him, and why they had to get the Nakajima-kai on board.
We know what it means to get in bed with people like this,
Nakajima said. Though he remained composed, his movements grew increasingly tense.
We know the risks, and we know when to say no.
He pointed at Yardley without looking at him.
This is when to say no. We would all be making a mistake.
Shioya pressed her lips together and shrugged.
We,
she said, and gestured to the rest of the resistance members,
see it differently. Charles Yardley and the U.S. government can open doors, whether you want to use him or not.
Yardley laughed and looked down, shaking his head, smiling. Was he enjoying this?
No need to fight on my account. I'm only here to help, I assure you.
Nakajima laughed as well, dripping with cynicism.
The only person you're here to help is yourself. How do the rest of you not see this? Look at how he gets off on this.
Yardley held up his hands in surrender again and bowed his head.
We don't need him, and neither do you. We've been doing this a lot longer than you have,
Nakajima said. Shioya turned to look at her fellow resistance members.
Listen to this. The ones who are always getting in bed with those in power would tell us not to do the same.
She turned back to Nakajima and pointed at him.
You will not tell us how to fight back. You're not in charge of this effort. You work with us, not above us. You can help us, be part of something bigger than yourself, or you can get out of our way.
She spread her hands.
Your choice.
Disgust spread over Nakajima's face. He looked her up and down.
After all we've done to help you and your cause, you talk to us as if our grandparents weren't helping Tokyo on the streets while yours were busy playing video games. Only now, with our city torn to shreds, do you care about helping the people. We are moved to assist you because you want to help Japan. But don't forget who has cradled this city's well-being in their hands for generations. We won't throw away our honor and integrity to work with an American snake.
Shioya made an exaggerated, confused expression to ensure everyone could see it.
The reptiles call the politician a snake? Please, let's not forget who we all really are. Ninkyo or not, you're criminals. You help the people one day so you can lord over them the next. We're criminals too, because the system our laws support has become corrupt. You draw nonsensical boundaries for what? Pride? Charles Yardley is the missing piece that we need. We're willing to do whatever it takes to give Japan its autonomy back. Why aren't you?
One of the other Nakajima-kai slammed his fist against the wall to draw attention.
We won't be disrespected while you hold out your hand for our help. We don't need to fight,
Yardley said, opening his hands.
Stay out of this.
We're getting nowhere.
People on both sides shouted over each other. Nakajima waited for the wave of crosstalk to settle before he spoke.
We've been willing to help you until now because we can see your intentions are true. But before we stepped in, you were a disorganized mess. That's to be expected when you don't have the experience to inform.
Listen to this patronizing shit.
Another resistance member spat.
Work with us or don't,
Shioya said.
We're using every resource we can. That includes this American snake, whether you like it or not.
Nakajima lifted his chin and considered her. After a moment, he gestured to his people and turned his back.
We're done. Let's go.
The Nakajima-kai threw the door open and left, leaving the resistance with Charles Yardley. Back at Ninth Step Station, Miyako and Emma prepared to speak to the woman who had turned herself in for the murder of Murata Haruki.
62-year-old Nagao Shizu,
Miyako read on her sleeve, while Emma skimmed over the updated case file as well.
Clean record until now, but she's the mother of the employee who died in prison, Nagao Ikuma.
And she's one of the 3 witnesses you identified in the footage,
Emma said. Miyako met her gaze. That familiar rush of adrenaline coursed through her, the one that inevitably came when they were about to catch a killer.
Yes, she is. Let's get the story.
They entered the interrogation room. Nagao Shizu sat in handcuffs on the opposite side of the table, leaning back in the chair and picking at her pale blue nail varnish. Sweat dampened her shirt under her arms.
"It's very hot in here,"
she said before they could get settled.
Welcome to summer in Tokyo,
Miyako said.
"Don't you have air conditioning?"
Miyako knew better than to let the woman's age affect her judgment. Violence could arise anywhere. From anyone.
Air conditioning is the least of your concerns right now.
Nagao took a deep breath.
"Fine. Are you ready to take my formal statement, officers?"
Inspector Koreda,
Miyako said, then gestured to Emma.
Lieutenant Higashi.
My apologies. Inspector and Lieutenant, then.
Go ahead,
Emma said.
Start from the beginning.
I killed him. I killed Murata.
Miyako kept her expression neutral and rotated her hand in the air.
Rewind a little. Your son, Ikuma, was killed in prison recently, wasn't he?
Yes. That's why I killed Murata. He killed my son. They were the closest I have ever seen 2 friends. Like brothers. But he betrayed my Ikuma.
She twisted her hands together and sat up straighter.
I'm prepared to go to prison. I have no need to lie about what I've done.
Rarely had Miyako seen someone so eager to confess. Nagao practically trembled, but not only with fear. Miyako knew pure fear. This was mixed with something else. Anger, maybe.
We just need a little more information,
Emma said.
What do you mean he killed your son? From what we understand, your son was in prison.
Another prisoner stabbed him. But it was Murata who held the weapon. He sent my son to prison. Murata framed him. He was innocent.
Fervor crept into her voice, but she otherwise maintained her composure.
After so much time as friends, we all use that word, friend, so liberally. But this was friendship. They knew everything about each other, stood by each other in the worst of times. Ikuma was there for Murata when his father died. Let Murata cry himself to sleep on his lap and stayed with him for a month to help him grieve. Ikuma never made him feel shameful for struggling in such darkness. He was a true friend to him. And now he's dead. Murata deserved to die for what he did, embezzling that money and framing Ikuma. It's because of him my boy is gone.
You're saying he embezzled the money? Miyako said. Not your son. She lifted her chin.
That's right. And I accept what I've done. It had to happen. I'm at peace with whatever happens to me now.
We'll need you to share your full confession for the record,
Emma said.
Consider it done.
Where is the remote controller for the mask?
Miyako said.
I threw it away.
So you said when you were brought in. Where did you throw it away?
Nagao paused.
Into the Sumida River. Long gone.
Here's the thing about that,
Miyako said.
You said that when they brought you in. Before you talked to us.
Yes.
But we had our people look at all the security footage from the bank of the river at the time you said you threw the remote away.
Miyako shrugged.
You don't show up.
My memory could have been off. Maybe I gave the wrong time.
Yeah.
Miyako shook her head.
That's the thing. We do this all the time. We know people aren't always accurate. Memories are tricky. Times can be hard to pin down. So we always scan well beyond the time frames people give us when we review footage. You're not on any of it.
You must not be looking at the right footage then. I put it in the river.
Emma leaned over the table.
You turned yourself in. And you were so eager. So why are you lying about the remote?
I threw it in the river.
Miyako shrugged at Emma performatively.
I guess Nagao-san wants us to spend extra time and resources finding this remote, even though she turned herself in. Why would she want that? Doesn't make sense to me,
Emma said.
Especially since we will find it. We always do. Lying about it only means it'll take longer.
Miyako turned back to Nagao.
So why do you want this to take longer than it needs to, when you were so eager to turn yourself in?
Nagao stared straight ahead, gaze stubbornly locked on the wall.
You have my confession. That's all you need.
Who designed the mask?
Miyako said.
What?
Nagao seemed thrown off by the question.
The mask that killed Murata. They don't sell those at Daiso. Did you make it?
I don't know how to design things like that. What do you take me for?
Then who did?
Miyako said. She pressed her lips together.
I know someone who knows someone.
Don't we all?
Emma said.
Who made the mask?
She sighed.
My son was A kind person who makes friends easily. I'm not the only one upset about his death. His cellmate was kind enough to meet with me and provide me with a contact. I wouldn't know how to turn him in even if you questioned me for a year, so don't ask. I never knew his name or saw his face. Or hers. Now are you going to put me in jail or what?
She was so eager. It was strange.
Keep thinking about that remote device,
Emma said. As Emma headed for the door, Miyako joined her, and they left Nagao alone. Watching her through the glass, it was more obvious than ever that she was hiding something. Anxiety stretched her muscles taut, and she nervously wiped her hands on her dress. It could just be the fear of facing prison, but something really was off.
I don't feel like she's lying about her involvement.
Emma stretched her neck and continued watching Nagao.
Why lie about the rest of it?
Nishimura hurried across the room to join them, fanning himself with the top to a plastic container.
Where are we at?
Superintendent Nishimura.
Emma motioned to Nagao through the glass.
She refuses to tell us where the murder weapon is. The remote. We'll get it out of her,
Miyako added.
Leave that for trial,
Nishimura said.
We have our confession, and I want this case closed. The Matsuri murder is becoming increasingly sensationalized in the media.
Miyako's mind raced, scanning over her impressions of Nagao's statements, the evidence, the witness testimonies. Nagao's insistence that they arrest her. What was bothering her? She knew better than to ignore her instincts, but this just kept torturing her, elusive like a half-forgotten memory.
Superintendent Nishimura,
Miyako said.
We just need a little more time. The rest of today. She's hiding something. What if someone else disposed of the trigger?
You think someone else is involved?
Nishimura shifted, on edge.
It could be that. Or...
Determination rushed through Miyako.
I need to look at the footage again.
Emma briefly shook her head.
We've scoured that. The control could be so small we'd never detect it visually. There's something in that footage, Emma.
I don't need you chasing ghosts on a recording, Koreda,
Nishimura said.
Please, just the rest of today. If we don't find anything, we'll close it.
Nishimura considered her, chewing on his lip. He sighed.
Lieutenant Higashi, keep your eye on Nagao. Use your judgment to decide when you should speak to her again, while you...
Nishimura looked at Miyako.
Go over the footage. I'm trusting that you know how to use your time wisely, but get this taken care of. Figure it out, or close it.
Miyako switched off the news feed in her ear to allow herself to fully settle into viewing the security recordings. She'd stay here until midnight if she had to. The footage played again and again. Occasionally she would focus on scrubbing over a particular snippet in the recording of one drone or another, but nothing specific stood out to her, until she came to the moments following the dancer's death. Finally, she realized what had been nagging at her. The sword-wielding dancer, Nagao Mirei. She was the daughter of the woman who confessed to the murder, sister to the former employee who died in prison, and she had been previously deemed unsuspicious. It was her movements that seemed off. Once the dancers realized the victim was bleeding out, Nagao Mirei dropped her sword, pushed her mask back on top of her head so she could see what was happening. And once she saw the victim, she held her hands to her face in horror. All of which was normal. The strange part was when she moved her hands away from her mouth. As Miyako scrubbed this part of the footage on separate drone feeds, she could see that, unlike the people around her, Nagao didn't simply drop her hands. That would be the natural movement. Cover your mouth unconsciously when you see something horrifying, Then, just as unconsciously, move your hand down off your face. Yet Nagao didn't do this. Instead, she almost seemed to rub her mouth or lick the inside of her hand before carefully pulling it away from her mouth. Miyako had to re-watch it several times from multiple angles to determine whether she was reading too much into what was ultimately a very short clip. But no, there it was, captured by all 3 drones. The same strange movement. What was she doing? Maybe it was nothing, but it was enough to bring her in for questioning. Nagao Mide was a broadly built, fresh-faced woman with no tattoos or other visible augmentations, which was becoming increasingly rare to see. She moved through Ninth Step Station with a vigilant demeanor, as if she thought someone was going to jump out from around the corner and attack her. Emma and Miyako deliberately walked her past her mother's interrogation room so that they could observe her reaction. She stopped and put her hands on the window, banging lightly. The mother looked up, but of course couldn't see who was on the other side.
What are you doing to my mother? Why is she in there like that?
You're going to need to calm down,
Emma said, and gently took Mide by the arm. Even though they engineered this moment, they couldn't have her punching windows and yelling.
Let go of me and tell me why my mother is in there.
Miyako stared at her.
She confessed to the murder of Murata Haruki.
At this, Mide fell silent, face slack with dread. They guided her to her own interrogation room and sat down across from her at the table. As soon as they had settled, Mide looked at them.
Let my mother go. It was me. I killed Murata.
Emma raised her eyebrows.
That's exactly what your mother said when she came in. That she killed Murata.
She's protecting me. Your mother would probably do the same.
Both Miyako and Emma remained silent to encourage her to speak.
I wasn't coming in here planning to come clean, but I can't let you take my mother down for this. She's in her elder years and shouldn't be in prison.
She pointed at her own face.
I did it.
Miyako crossed her arms.
Walk us through it.
I replaced his mask. Had a replica made. I figured out when during the dance I wanted it to activate. Practiced activating it, then did it.
Slow down a minute,
Miyako said. She swiped stills from the footage onto the table's screen. In them, Mide put on her display of shock, then appeared to swallow something.
Tell us what we're seeing here.
That's the activation device. I swallowed it.
Emma grimaced at the thought of the evidence.
Thanks for that.
It was the best way to get rid of it quickly.
Your mother is saying she threw it in the river,
Emma said.
She's lying to protect me.
So she had nothing to do with this whatsoever?
Miyako asked. Mide was quiet.
She's saying she's the one who commissioned the mask,
Emma said.
Is that true?
There's no crime in having a mask made. Even a mask like that. People like strange things.
That was a bold claim.
There absolutely is a crime if we can show the intent to use the mask in a murder, which there was, and to which she already confessed.
Did my mother tell you why Ikuma is dead?
She said Murata let Ikuma take the fall for his embezzlement.
Mide stared at the table in front of her.
When Ikuma found out about Murata's crime, he tried covering it up for him. They caught Ikuma on the security footage after hours, messing with the files, and that sealed his fate. There is no justice in Tokyo anymore. Not unless you take it for yourself. He died for nothing. Murata is the one who stole from the company, not Ikuma.
He took the fall for his friend because that's the kind of man he was. Willing to throw away his life if it meant someone he loved walked away with their freedom. And he died for it. Murata had every opportunity to exonerate Ikuma. He chose not to, after everything Ikuma had done for him, after years of friendship and support.
So you decided to take the law into your own hands. Judge, jury, and executioner, Emma said.
Like I said, there's no justice in this city anymore. Have you looked around lately?
We're not talking about all of Tokyo, Miyako said. We're talking about you with Murata's blood on your hands. You and your mother.
Please don't go after her. She didn't do this. All she did was commission the mask.
Which means she killed Murata too. You both did. Together. And you'll go down together too.
Both Miyako and Emma stood to leave, ignoring Mire's pleas to let her mother go, and stood just outside the interrogation room in silence, watching Mire. What a mess. The trial would sort out the specifics of what was actually true. Both claimed to be the primary perpetrator in an effort to spare the other. Truth probably lived in both places. They worked together to commit murder. A family ruined.
Nishimura will be happy,
Emma said. Miyako checked the time on her sleeve.
Mind if I go ahead and take off? I'll send in my report from home.
Go for it,
Emma said.
We've spent enough time in this oven.
You staying?
Just for a few.
Miyako started to leave, then paused.
You're waiting for Kensuke?
She shrugged.
Why do you bother with him?
I'm not bothering with him.
Emma unwrapped a peanut butter cup and took a bite.
Not in any significant way. You know, he tried to get me to come to the Matsuri with him when he heard you took Kaori?
If you want to go, we should just go. You don't have to go with him.
I think he thought he could sweep in and romance me like he did when I first got here.
That's what he does. He carries all these moves in his pocket and pulls them out when he needs them.
Emma couldn't argue with that, but she felt a twinge of guilt talking about him this way.
Don't do that,
Miyako said.
Don't feel bad. Do you think he'd feel bad if it were you pursuing him and not the other way around? Hardly.
You're right.
I don't get why you put up with it for...
Miyako waved her hand in the air.
It's fun stress relief, like I've said. I can compartmentalize.
She took another bite of candy. Miyako stared at her. She seemed to want to say something, but didn't.
What is it?
Nothing.
She smiled and patted Emma on the arm.
Have fun. Really. I don't have to get it or like it.
Maybe eventually I'll get lucky and find what you two have. I'm not in a rush.
Miyako smiled and took the small remaining bite of chocolate out of Emma's hand and popped it into her own mouth.
See you.
After Miyako left, Emma lingered at the interrogation room window and watched Nagao Mire repeatedly wiping tears from her cheeks, still fighting her emotions about her mother's involvement. What a mess. All because one man tried to steal from his employer. Ikuma cared so much for his friend he risked everything to hide his crimes, and lost his life for it in the end. Mire had told herself the story that her brother's self-chosen fate was unjust, but that her own decision to murder Murata was justice. Now she wept over her mother having been swept up in the undertow of her choices. How many other stories and lies had led to this place? And where else would they have led, had they not caught Mire? A knock came on Miyako's apartment door. Miyako started, accidentally hitting the edge of her cutting board and sending both it and a knife flying. Thankfully, it landed well away from her foot. Of course, in that exact moment, The sizzling vegetables on her stove decided to start burning.
Chikuso.
Are you okay?
Kaori's voice came muffled through the door.
1 second.
She turned down the heat under the pan, picked up the knife, and hurried to the door. Clothing spattered with sauce. Hair a mess. When she opened it, Kaori stared for a beat, then laughed.
You should have waited for me.
Kaori stepped inside, gently brushed Miyako's hair out of her face, and wiped who knows what off her forehead.
You get so impatient in the kitchen.
Miyako closed the door behind her and rushed back to the kitchen, speaking quickly.
Come in. I have to get this off the burner. You're always cooking me such amazing food. I wanted to do something nice for you for a change.
A drawn-out, quiet sound of amazement fell from Kaori's lips as she took in what Miyako had made for her. The soft chirp of traditional music chimed in the living room, where paper lanterns hung from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow. A yukata in a soft yellow pattern was draped over a chair, next to another in lavender and blue, in Miyako's and Kaori's respective sizes. The very same lavender and blue yukata that Kaori had been admiring a couple of weeks prior. Pale pink petals fell in a repeating animation on Miyako's projection screen. Nowhere near as impressive as the Sumi-e augmented reality of Tokyo's Azabu Juban Norio Matsuri, but hopefully the sentiment came through. Miyako quickly piled her mishmash of Matsuri-inspired food onto large plates for them to share. Overstuffed curry buns that went a bit too heavy on the spices, grilled corn that was surprisingly evenly cooked, overdone steak on sticks, sautéed vegetables, and of course, a couple of ice-cold beers.
I was going to get you some mango kakigori, but I ran out of time.
Kaori startled her again by looping her arms around Miyako's waist from behind and resting her chin on her shoulder. Self-consciousness flooded Miyako. Surely she was sweaty and gross, which then annoyed her, because why was she self-conscious? Kaori had been around a sweaty Miyako before.
It's perfect.
Kaori kissed the side of Miyako's neck.
We can get kakigori later.
Heat flushed Miyako's face.
You should go put on your yukata.
She paused.
Unless that's too corny.
She turned around to look at Kaori. What if she thought Miyako was trying to shove their resistance involvement under the rug? What if this seemed like overkill? An attempt to pretend like nothing was wrong?
Is this too much? Stop being silly. It's wonderful.
She kissed Miyako, followed by a playful lick on the nose. She went to put on the yukata.
Oh!
Miyako pretended to be annoyed and wiped her nose off. As she continued plating the food and listened to Kaori talk about how her aunt was doing, the power conversion ship's destruction seemed very far away. Let it, and the resistance, stay out there in the harbor, at least for tonight. Charles Yardley sat in his office while nighttime Tokyo glittered outside his window, hand cradling a glass of whiskey to calm his nerves. How dare the Nakajima-kai refuse his generosity on such offensive and short-sighted grounds? After everything he'd done for Tokyo, the resistance could see the benefit of working together for the good of Japan. And that was all he wanted, for Japan to thrive and prosper. The resistance could see that. Nakajima Kuniyuki couldn't see past his pride. Charles had even been willing to obscure himself in the process, to let them all bask in the glory of victory while he remained in the shadows. So much for that. No, this wouldn't do. He set the whiskey on his desk and swiped through his contacts. There was a way to make the Nakajima-kai see what they refused to acknowledge. A little bloodshed now would be nothing against the backdrop of a liberated Tokyo.
You're listening to Ninth Step Murders Season 2. Created and produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Listen away. Ninth Step Murders is written by Malka Older, Fran Wilde, Jacqueline Koyanagi, and Curtis C. Chen. Produced by Rhoda Bayesa and executive produced by Molly Barton. Performed by Emily Wu Zeller. Audio production, direction, sound design, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith. Additional editing by Corey Barton. Cover design by Kendall Thomas with original illustration by Armin Rangani.